Norway just somehow found itself into that messy situation. So today we have these two language variations, Bokmål, which comes from Danish, and Nynorsk, which is the supposedly ancient Norwegian. Weirdly enough, Nynorsk, it means new Norwegian. Like, why new Norwegian should be called old Norwegian? But anyway,
Old.
that doesn't make much sense. But fortunately, nowadays, 90% of Norwegians use Bokmål. So that's the variation that comes from Danish. So therefore, it's very, very logical if you are learning Norwegian, start with Bokmål, unless you know that you're going to move to a place where people use mostly Nynorsk, then it doesn't really make sense to start learning Nynorsk. It makes sense to start learning a little bit of Nynorsk on top of your Bokmål studies once you have reached, say B1 level, A2 plus, something like that. Because Nynorsk helps you with two things. Firstly, you cannot really avoid it 100% because you will just encounter texts that are in Nynorsk. You will, like newspapers, books, government websites. The government is forced to publish a certain portion of their texts in Nynorsk, so you cannot really avoid it. On top of it, it helps you to understand some Norwegian dialects better. So some passive understanding of Nynorsk is good, but I have to admit I would also not be able to write something in Nynorsk. I can only write Bokmål.
Exactly. That's kind of like one thing that I want to kind of expand on. Like, let's say that it's someone that has been just arrived in Oslo, or like has been just in Norway for very little. What are some like signs that would immediately tell which of the two writing systems is used? Like, are there like massive differences, or is it just like subtle ones?
It's quite subtle. For example, the word Norway in itself, like in Bokmål, it's Norge, and in Nynorsk, it's Norek. So it's just like two letters flipped. Or with the article, like the non-definite article for the masculine, it's en in Bokmål, and it's ein, like with the letter I in the middle. In Nynorsk. So then you have to know, you basically have to know. It's not like there are letters that don't exist in one or the other. You basically would really have to know that a specific text is Nynorsk and not Bokmål.
Okay. So it's not like a different type, because I was expecting, are these gonna be two different type of scripts or something, like completely different alphabets, completely different, but I guess they're not. They're like very similar. It's just some words.
They are quite similar. Well, I mean, not that super similar. So due to the historical roots, Danish is closer to Bokmål than Bokmål is to Nynorsk. So that's a bit weird. But sometimes, like when you read a Danish text, you need maybe two sentences or 2 or 3 lines sometimes to understand, that's Danish and it's not Bokmål. But it's also not that far. Like Nynorsk is not that far away that you're like completely lost and you're like, oh my God, I have no clue what that is.
Okay. So still the same language, but different words then.
Yeah. It's maybe a little bit like, say someone in Germany had tried to make a second official language out of some German dialect. And you're like, I can read that somehow, and sometimes there's a word I don't understand, and sometimes I'm like, why does she spell it like this? It doesn't make any sense. But more or less you understand everything still.
Okay.
Okay.
And about the dialects, actually, now that you mentioned them, how would you advise someone to deal with them? Like, also, I think one of the tips that you mentioned also applies to that one, that if you know into which region you're going to move or you're having your vacation, then you can like learn that dialect. But otherwise, how would you do it?
Yeah, definitely. So if you know where you're going, you might focus on the dialect from that region from the beginning. So for example, find a teacher from that region, because that's just the way that makes most sense. Otherwise, what most Norwegian courses, including my courses, do is that you start with Oslo dialect, and that's a bit of a pragmatic solution, simply because firstly, the region around Oslo probably has the biggest number of Norwegian speakers, so it's probably the biggest dialect group in Norway. So it's just like somehow a good shot if you don't know anything else. Also, it's the most international region in Norway, so that's where most of the jobs are. People who are immigrants into Norway have a high probability of going there. Also, the Oslo dialect is very close to Bokmål, relatively close to Bokmål, so that makes it a bit easier. Of course, if you're learning a dialect that is really far from the written language, then that's an extra challenge. So basically, that's what most people do. They just start with Oslo dialect.
I see. And let's say that somebody is now interested after listening to this, they go and they start learning their own Norwegian journey. And I want to ask you, what's like one mistake that often newcomers and learners of Norwegian make, and what's the best way to avoid them?
Well, I would say the biggest mistake people make, not just learning Norwegian probably, but many languages, they don't focus on pronunciation early on. They don't try to get a solid foundation of the pronunciation. Once you have that, everything becomes quite easy. The listening comprehension is easier. It's easier to speak because you feel that you have a certain mastery of the language, of the sound system. So that is something that I would do early on, to really try to get all the Norwegian sounds right, to just sound natural, actually. And for that, you just have to practice the sounds that the language has. And once you got them right, then really that's an achievement for a lifetime, you might say. It's just going to stay with you. And you can make progress very fast, because when you're learning vocabulary, there is really no shortcut. You cannot hack yourself to fluency. It just doesn't work. Our brain is limited. How many new words we can have every day, that's somehow limited. But having a solid pronunciation is something you can acquire in maybe a couple of weeks.
Oh, okay. That's a lot faster than I thought. And do you know some specific techniques or like tips and tricks to help the people acquire those sound skills faster or more efficiently?
Basically, when it comes really down to learning the sounds, I would say the most important thing is that you find somebody who tells you what exactly you have to do. Very often people say, try to listen to the sound and try to reproduce it. That might work somehow, but still very often you might just be a little off because your ears are not used to these sounds. So you might pick them up in a wrong way or in an odd way. And then you have like this thing that always is a little bit off when you're speaking Norwegian. So you should get somebody who really knows what you have to do, what you have to practice, where to put your lips, where to put your tongue, whether that sound is long or short or whatever. Like really these technical details. And actually, I didn't learn that from Norwegian. I learned it more from Czech, because when I was learning Czech, there was a sound in the Czech language that I couldn't produce. And eventually I went to a speech therapist, because all the Czech teachers had told me, well, you can't learn it, then you can't learn it. That's just a reality, and you have to give up on that. And the speech therapist said, no, why wouldn't you learn it? I can show you how to do it. And
very like completely off the like 100. Yeah, like completely flipped upside down.
Yeah, very, very odd. So I just did what she told me, and I practiced that. And after a couple of weeks, I could produce this sound. And this is something that I'm always thinking about whenever I'm producing materials for learning languages, that when people say, oh, it's difficult and you cannot really learn that, you have to learn that from childhood. And I'm like, no, you just need somebody who tells you what you have to do. So I try to really break that down in videos, for example, when I teach or when I make materials, that really check, okay, what exactly do I have to do to practice this sound? And then eventually you will get it right and it will sound natural.
Yeah, and it's not as easy as it sounds to know how to describe a sound, because I had something similar experience when I had to kind of teach a specific part of Italian to some friends of mine that were from the Balkan region. Like a lot of people from the Balkan have very good pronunciation of vowels, and they can replicate most like even foreign sounding sounds, except the concept of differentiating between the double consonant and single consonant. So I was like, oh yeah, you just put a harder T, it's like dato e dato or something like that. Like, but it's very difficult, like, because not everybody can understand the sort of rules as easily as somebody that has been talking for their entire time. And some people may have very good ability to learn a language after knowing these sort of very basic elements, but somebody has to give them a sort of like way to make them understand, which is extremely hard. It's extremely hard. So anybody that can actually teach them sound is very good, and it is like kudos to them, because I tried it very hard